Welcome to This is Thailand. Most of the men who end up on this channel found their way into trouble in a bar. Not all of them, but most. There's a version of this story you've probably heard before. The beer, the pretty girl, the slow drain of money across the counter, the dawning realization that came too late. And those stories are real. We've told plenty of them. But every so often, a story comes through that sits differently. That doesn't fit the template. A man who didn't go to the bars, who read the warnings, who thought he was being careful. A man who got married in a ceremony with real guests and a real daughter who learned his name, and who still ended up on a one-way flight home trying to figure out exactly what had happened to him. Today's story is Brendan's. He's 51, from County Offaly in the Irish Midlands, and he spent 30 years working peat bogs before he came to Thailand with money in his pocket. And though he'd have argued with you about this at the time, a quiet kind of loneliness he'd been carrying around so long, he'd stopped noticing the weight of it. I'll tell you this much. Brendan is not a man who does things impulsively, not a man who panics or shouts or makes scenes. When he finally decided he needed to know the truth about his situation, he found a way to test it that was entirely, specifically him. And the answer he got back is the reason he's talking to us today. This one's going to stay with you. Here's his story in his own words. I'll start with the bog because you can't really understand any of the rest of it without the bog. Bord na Móna, the Irish peat company for anyone who doesn't know. I started there at 19, cutting and harvesting peat out of the Offaly boglands, and I was still there at 48 when they handed me my redundancy notice. Nearly 30 years, the same land more or less, the same machinery, updated here and there. The same early starts and the same flask of tea that was always gone by 10:30 no matter how big I made it. It wasn't glamorous work, I knew that, but it was solid and it was mine. And there's a particular kind of satisfaction in a job that's entirely physical, where the measure of a good day is right there in front of you at the end of it. You can see what you did. Not everyone gets that. The redundancies had been coming for years. Ireland was phasing out peat harvesting, environmental commitments, EU pressure, all of that. I'm not complaining about the policy. The bogs needed a rest, honestly. But it meant the company was shrinking, year by year, and by the time they got to me, I was 48 years old and not exactly surprised. I signed the paperwork, took the package, and drove home. My father's land was the other thing. 40 acres outside Tullamore that had been in the family since before anyone thought to write it down. Rough ground mostly. We'd cut turf on it, grazed a few cattle over the years, but it was never going to make anyone rich. Or so I'd always assumed. Then a wind energy consortium turned up and made an offer that took me about 3 readings to believe was real. They wanted the land for turbines. The figure they named was, well, it was more than my father earned in his entire life, put together, more than I expected to see in mine. I sat with the offer for 2 weeks. Then I signed. So there I was, 48 years old, no job, no land, 270,000 euros sitting in an AIB account in Tullamore looking back at me every time I checked my phone, and absolutely no idea what to do with any of it. The house was quiet. It had been quiet for 11 years since my marriage ended, and I'd gotten used to it in the way you get used to a low-grade noise. You stop hearing it consciously, but it's still there. My ex-wife. I'm not going to talk about her at length. She left. That's the short version. She went to Galway with someone else, and I stayed in Tullamore, and that was that. We didn't have children, which was, depending on the day, either a mercy or the thing I was sorest about. I'd had 11 years to work through my feelings about all of it and reach some kind of peace. I hadn't managed it, but I'd gotten very good at not thinking about it, which is a different thing that sometimes feels like the same thing. I was not, in any meaningful sense, living. I was occupying the house. I was watching the GAA, microwaving things from Lidl, doing occasional jobs for a neighbor with a few acres of sheep, staying busy enough not to notice I wasn't happy. Then Declan started posting on Facebook. Declan had worked the bogs with me for about 15 years. Good man, quiet like me, but with a dry wit that only came out after the second pint. He'd taken early retirement 2 years ahead of me and, to everyone's mild surprise, moved to Chiang Mai in northern Thailand. I don't think any of us fully believed he'd done it until the photos started appearing. And they weren't exciting photos, that's the thing. He wasn't posting from beaches or nightclubs. It was Sunday markets, a bowl of noodles somewhere, a temple at sunrise, his face in all of them looking settled, I suppose is the word, the way a man looks when he's stopped bracing for something. I messaged him once, maybe 6 months after the land sale. Just said something like it looks nice over there. He replied with a phone number and said, ring me sometime. I didn't ring him for another 4 months. I'm not fast. But February came, and February in Awfully is its own particular argument against staying in Awfully. And I was sitting in the kitchen at 7:30 on a Tuesday evening, listening to the heating knock and watching rain come sideways across the back garden. And I thought, right. I went online and I booked a one-way flight to Chiang Mai. Return open. No particular plan. I'm not sure I was even fully aware I'd done it until I saw the confirmation email. I packed one bag, told my neighbor I'd be gone a while, drove to Dublin Airport in the dark. I was 51 years old and I had no particular reason to stay, and for the first time in 11 years, a reason to go. That's the full story of how I ended up in Thailand. There's no more drama to it than that. I want to say one more thing before I get to Chiang Mai. I knew about the stories. I'd read things online, once I'd booked the flight, the forums, the warnings, the accounts of men who'd gone over and lost their heads and their savings to women in bars. I wasn't naive, or I thought I wasn't. I'd sat in my kitchen in Tullamore reading these stories and thinking, well, I'm not that fella. I'm not going to bars. I'm not lonely and desperate. I'm just having a look around. I think about that a lot now, the certainty of it, how clean it felt, the distinction between me and those other men. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I landed in Chiang Mai on a Thursday afternoon in late February, and the heat came at me through the airport doors like something physical. Not unpleasant, just present. The kind of warmth that makes you aware of your own body in a way that Irish weather never does. I stood there for a moment with my bag, sweating through my shirt, and thought, well, this is different. Declan met me outside in a battered songthayo he'd clearly flagged down as a matter of habit. He looked well, tanned and loose in a way I didn't remember from the bogs. We shook hands and he said something like, you made it then, and I said I did, and that was the extent of the reunion. We were never men for speeches. He'd booked me into a guest house near Niman Road, which is the area of Chiang Mai where the coffee shops are nicer than they need to be, and everyone on the footpath seems to be carrying a tote bag. It was clean, comfortable, about 600 baht a night, roughly 16 euros, and had a small balcony that looked out onto a side street where a woman sold muping off a charcoal grill every morning from 6. Pork skewers. I ate them standing up my first 3 mornings because I didn't know where else to go, and they were right there, and they were genuinely excellent. Declan gave me the first few days to sort myself out. He had his routines and didn't break them for me, which I respected. We met for dinner a couple of evenings at a place he liked near the old city walls. A little open-fronted restaurant, plastic chairs, a chang each, larb and sticky rice and whatever they had that day. He talked about life in Chiang Mai without selling it. He described the visa process, the cost of living, the things that irritated him, the things he'd stopped noticing. He told me about a man from Kildare who'd moved here 2 years ago and lost 30,000 euro to a woman he'd met online before he'd even arrived. And he said it not as a warning exactly, more just as information. This is the landscape, he was saying. Pay attention to it. I was paying attention. I want to make that clear. I was watching everything. The motorbike taxis clustered at every corner in orange vests. The monks in saffron robes moving through the morning market at Warat. The spirit houses outside every building. Small, ornate structures on pedestals with offerings of fruit and flowers and little elephant figurines. The way the city had this layered quality, old temples jammed up against tourist cafes, jammed up against ordinary neighborhood streets where kids played, and grandmothers sat in plastic chairs and stray dogs slept in patches of shade. I wasn't floating around in a holiday haze. I was taking it in carefully, the way I'd taken in a new piece of equipment on the bog. This is how it works. These are the things that can go wrong. The cooking class was Declan's idea. He'd done it himself when he first arrived, he said. Good way to learn a few dishes and meet people. He said it in the offhand way he said most things, not pushing it, take it or leave it. I had nothing else on. I went. It was a school up near the old city, popular with tourists, organized but not overly polished. 8 or 9 of us stood at individual stations with ingredients in small bowls, and a young Thai woman at the front demonstrating. Tom Kha Pad Thai, green curry. The mortar and pestle was for the curry paste. I am not going to pretend I was good at it. The pestle kept sliding because I was being too careful, not enough force, and the lemongrass wasn't breaking down properly and just sort of sitting there looking at me. The woman at the station next to mine noticed. She didn't say anything immediately, just watched for a moment, and then she said, in English, you need to hit it, not ask it nicely. Her name was Nok. She was 38. She had short hair and a practical manner, and she wasn't there on holiday. She explained later that she took the class occasionally, every few months, because she found it diverting and because the instructor was a friend of her sister's. She worked at her sister's tailoring shop, 10 minutes walk away on a small lane off Niman. She had a daughter, 7 years old. She offered this information naturally, just as part of who she was, not as a detail she decided to deploy. We talked through the rest of the class. Not flirtatiously. There wasn't that energy, or not exactly. More like two people who found they could talk to each other without effort, which is rarer than it sounds and which I, personally, had not experienced in quite a long time. I went back the next day. I'll be honest with you about this. I went back because I wanted to see her again, but I constructed a reason. I needed a shirt altered. I thought I remembered seeing fabric in the window of the shop. I did need a shirt altered. That part was true. But I could have left the shirt. I went anyway. The shop was on a small lane, a bit back from the road, with bolts of fabric stacked along one wall and a ceiling fan that worked hard. Her sister Dao was at the main machine when I came in, and she looked up and assessed me with the complete neutrality of a person who has no particular interest in charming anyone, which I found, strangely, very reassuring. She took the shirt and told me to come back Thursday. Nok was in the back. She came out when she heard me, and we talked for 20 minutes about nothing much, and she made tea on a little portable burner, and she didn't offer to show me around the city or suggest we go for dinner. She just drank her tea and asked me questions about Ireland with what seemed like genuine curiosity, and when I left she said, "See you Thursday for the shirt," and that was that. I walked back to the guest house in the heat and past a 7-Eleven and went in for a bottle of water, and I stood in the cold air for a moment longer than I needed to, and I thought, well, she seems decent. That's the whole of it. That was the thought. She seems decent. I didn't think I was starting anything. I didn't think I was being careful or incautious or anything else. I was just a man who'd had a conversation and found it pleasant and was going back on Thursday for a shirt. But I think, somewhere in me, I already knew I wasn't leaving yet. The shirt was ready on Thursday. It fit fine. I paid Dow, said thanks, and was halfway out the door when Nok appeared from the back and asked if I'd eaten. I hadn't. We walked to a place around the corner that sold khao soi, the northern Thai curry noodle dish, rich and slightly sour with crispy egg noodles on top. And we sat at a plastic table on the footpath, and she explained what I was eating while I ate it, and I thought, this is a perfectly ordinary thing that's happening. Just two people having lunch. She paid for herself. I want to say that clearly because I was watching for it. She took out her wallet without hesitation, without that pause some people do, where they wait to see if you'll offer. She just paid. It was 60 baht, roughly €1.60. It's not a significant amount, but I noticed it. That was the beginning of, well, whatever you want to call it. A courtship, I suppose, though we never called it that. We met for coffee. We walked around the old city moat on a Saturday morning. She showed me Doisuthep Temple one afternoon, the gold chetty at the top of the mountain, and she knew enough about the history to tell me things without making it a tour. I like that about her. She wasn't performing. She was just herself. I extended my visa at the end of the first month. Tourist visa, 30 days at a time initially. I could have left. I didn't have a reason to leave, and I had a reason to stay. And those two things combined to produce a decision I didn't consciously make. I was, as I kept telling myself, just not going yet. The first 3 months cost me, I've tried to add it up, maybe 40,000 to 50,000 baht all in. About 1,100 euros. 2 weekend trips, one to Pai up in the mountains, winding roads and cold evenings, and a little guest house with a fire, and one to Lampang. Quieter, horse-drawn carriages on the streets, and a temple with white elephants. Dinners, a few day trips. Nothing outrageous. It felt like what it was. Two people going out together, and the man picking up most of the bill, which is unremarkable anywhere in the world. And I know what you're thinking. Or I know what I would have been thinking if someone had told me this story. You're waiting for the ask, the sudden expense, the sob story about a sick relative. But that didn't happen. Not then. Not in those first months. She mentioned her family in Udon Thani the way you mention a fact about yourself. Her parents were there. Her mother wasn't well. She was the eldest daughter, so a lot of the responsibility fell to her. She sent money home each month, 5,000 baht or so, she said, about 130 euros. She said this not to make me feel anything in particular, just explaining how her finances worked when I asked why she still lived with her sister. I registered it as something admirable. A woman who looked after her people, which she was. That part, 1,000, still fairly sure, was real. I think about how I'd have felt at the time if someone had quietly pulled me aside and said, "What you're calling admirable is also a financial structure, and you are about to become part of it." One don't think I would have argued. I think I would have said I know, and kept going anyway, because I wasn't there to be prudent. I was there because I'd been cold and quiet and alone for 3 years in Tullamore, and for the first time in a long time something was warm. She wasn't beautiful in the way that makes you feel slightly stupid. Well, she was sometimes. There was an evening near the night bazaar when she was laughing at something I'd said, genuinely laughing, not performing it, and the light was doing something nice, and I thought, right, I understand now. I understand why men do this. But that's not what got me. What got me was the ordinary stuff. The fact that she noticed when I was tired before I said anything. The way she talked about her daughter. Not constantly, not as a prop, just occasionally and with precision. Malay liked drawing. Malay was stubborn about eating vegetables. Malay had said something funny last week that Knox still smiled about. And then, after about 3 weeks, one Saturday afternoon, we were walking near Nimmenhemen Road, and Knock had her for the day. And Malay was just there, small and serious, holding her mother's hand, looking at me with the frank assessment of a 7-year-old deciding whether a person is acceptable. I said hello. Malay said hello. Knock didn't make a thing of it. I know that introducing a child can be a move. I've read enough on the forums to know it's done deliberately sometimes, to create attachment, to accelerate things. Maybe it was. I can't tell you with certainty. What I can tell you is that Malay, over the following months, never once behaved like a prop. She was too interested in her own things to perform anything for my benefit. She drew pictures of cats and showed them to me without particular expectation. She corrected my attempts at Thai pronunciation with great thoroughness and no mercy. She was simply a child, and I, without naming it, without examining it, started to enjoy her company. That more than anything is the thing I should have been more careful about. Not the money, not the visa situation, the child. Because a man can detach from a woman when he has to. It's painful, but there's a shape to the grief, and eventually it ends. You know this from experience. What I hadn't planned for, what I didn't think to plan for, was how you detach from a 7-year-old who showed you her cat drawings. But I didn't know that yet. In those first 3 months, I was just a man from Awfully eating cow soy on a plastic chair in February, thinking, she seems decent. And the sun was out, and the Moo Ping lady was on the corner at 6 every morning. And for the first time in 11 years, the silence had stopped. At the end of month 3, I moved out of the guest house. It was a practical decision, I told myself. The guest house was fine, but 600 baht a night adds up, roughly 500 euros a month. And I could get a furnished 1-bedroom apartment near Nimmen for 12,000 baht a month, about 315 euros. Which was true. Both of those things were true. But I'd also stopped thinking of myself as a man passing through, and I think the apartment was the physical expression of that, even if I wasn't ready to say so out loud. The apartment had a small kitchen I never used, air conditioning that was either off or Arctic, and a window that looked out at the back of a massage place. It was fine. I was barely in it. Most evenings I was at Knock's house, a modest two-story place in a residential lane 10 minutes from the shop, the kind of street where neighbors know each other and kids ride bicycles, and there's always something cooking somewhere. She rented it with Dow. Malay had a room with drawings of cats stuck to the wall. I was there often enough that I had a cup, specifically a blue ceramic cup that was mine and stayed on a particular shelf. Nobody said anything about it. It was just there. Month 5. That's when it happened. We were sitting in her kitchen one evening, after dinner, Maylee asleep, and Knock was quiet in a way that was slightly different from her usual quiet. She was looking at something on her phone. I asked if everything was all right. She said yes. Then a few minutes later, she said, almost to herself, that the embroidery machine at the shop had broken. Not, can you help? Not, I need money. Just, the machine has broken. The repair quote is nearly as much as a new one. Dow has some savings, but not enough, and the machine does about a third of the shop's work. I said, how much is a new one? She told me, 85,000 baht, roughly 2,300 euros. And here's the thing I need to be honest about, because I've thought about this moment a great deal since. She didn't ask. I offered. I said it before she did. I said something like, I can help with that if it's useful, and she looked at me for a moment and said she couldn't ask me to do that. I said she wasn't asking. I was offering. There was a pause. She said she wanted to pay it back. I said there was no rush. She said no, she wanted to do it properly, and the next morning she showed up with a piece of paper. Handwritten, her name at the top, the amount, a repayment schedule she'd worked out herself, signed and dated. She handed it to me like it was a formal document. I still have that note. It's in a drawer somewhere in Tullamore. I don't take it out, but I haven't thrown it away either. What did I make of it at the time? I made everything of it. I thought a woman running a scheme doesn't write a repayment agreement. A woman who's working an angle doesn't hand you a piece of paper that acknowledges the debt and schedules the payments. I thought the note was proof of something, character, seriousness. I found it almost comically reassuring, which should perhaps have told me something about how much reassurance I was looking for. The repayments never came, not a single one. She never mentioned the note again, and I never raised it. I think we both quietly understood that it had served its purpose, which was to make me feel safe enough to give the money. And that was that. I'm not angry about this exactly. I'm more interested in myself for how thoroughly it worked. Over months 6 and 7, the relationship became something I couldn't reasonably describe as casual anymore. I was at her house most nights. I met Maylee's teacher at a school event one Saturday. A small thing, parents and a few foreign guests, drawings pinned to a board. And Maylee pointed me out to her teacher with the matter-of-fact tone of a child, explaining a piece of furniture, and the teacher smiled at me and I smiled back, and I felt, very briefly, like a normal person with a normal life. Her parents came from Udon Thani for a week in month 7. Her father was a retired farmer, a compact, quiet man about 10 years older than me, and he shook my hand and didn't say much, and I respected that about him immediately. Her mother was slower than she should have been for her age. You could see it in how carefully she moved, how she thought before she stood up. Diabetes, not confirmed later. She had the hospital paperwork somewhere if I wanted to see it. I said I didn't need to. She showed me anyway. I want to be careful here about what I'm saying. The mother's illness was real. I saw the medication. I saw the receipts from Maharaj Nakorn Chiang Mai Hospital. I'm not saying that was staged. What I'm saying is that sitting across from an unwell woman at a dinner table in Chiang Mai, being introduced as the man in her daughter's life, you feel things. Obligation, responsibility, the specific weight of being the person in the room with the resources. The conversation about the future had been happening between Knock and me for a few weeks by then, though neither of us had started it explicitly. It was more that the future had begun to appear in sentences, in the way she said we sometimes instead of I, in small domestic questions about whether I preferred this arrangement or that one. And I, a man who hadn't said we in 11 years and had stopped expecting to, found I didn't object to any of it. I should have, at this point, written down some numbers. Sat with myself for an afternoon, totaled up what the previous 7 months had cost, thought carefully about where the next 12 months were heading. I had 270 euros, 000. I had no income beyond what the savings generated. I was in a foreign country, not yet 52, with a retirement visa I'd sorted by parking 800,000 baht, about 22,000 euros, in a Thai bank account as required, which was money tied up and unavailable. I should have done the arithmetic. I didn't. Because I didn't want to. Because the arithmetic might have produced a number that required a decision, and I wasn't ready to make any decisions except the one I was already quietly making, which was to stay. I should explain Sin Sod before I explain what happened with Sin Sod, because a lot of people hear about it and immediately think, there it is, that's the scam. And that's not quite right. Sin Sod is a bride price. The groom's family pays the bride's family before the marriage. Cash, sometimes gold, sometimes both, as a demonstration that the man can provide, and as a mark of respect for the family giving their daughter. It's been part of Thai culture for a very long time, and it's genuine. It's not invented to extract money from foreigners. Plenty of Thai men pay it too. The amounts vary enormously depending on the family status, the woman's education, where she's from. For a divorced woman from a rural Isan family with a child, the figure would typically be lower than for an unmarried woman from a Bangkok professional family. This is not a secret. It's just how it works. I'd read about it. I'd asked Declan about it. He told me what he knew. Said when he'd asked around the expat community, the figure that came up as reasonable for a woman in Knox circumstances was somewhere between 100,000 baht and 300,000 baht. He also told me, without being pointed about it, that he'd heard of men being quoted much higher and that it was worth knowing where you stood before the conversation happened. So I knew. I wasn't going in blind. Her uncle Somchai came down from Udon Thani on a Saturday in month 8. He was about my age, a former civil servant, composed and careful in his manner. We met in the front room of Knock's house with tea and a plate of fruit that nobody touched, and the negotiation was formal without being hostile. More like a business meeting between two people who respect each other's time than anything combative. He spoke reasonable English and chose his words carefully. He proposed 300,000 baht, roughly 8,200 euros. I'd had 350,000 baht in mind as my upper limit, so this was below that. I said I thought that was reasonable, and we agreed without much further discussion. He seemed, I think, mildly surprised that I didn't push back harder. I don't know what he made of that. I shook his hand, and he left by early afternoon, and Knock, when I found her in the kitchen afterward, just nodded once and said thank you, quietly, without theatrics. I don't regret paying it. I want to be clear about that. I paid it as what it was, a cultural practice, a genuine tradition, something I'd agreed to take part in when one agreed to marry a Thai woman. If I'd married a woman from Clare or Roscommon, there would have been other expenses, different obligations. The Sin Sod was not the problem. The problem was what it represented, which was a point of no return I crossed without stopping to acknowledge it as such. We married in October. Small ceremony, registered properly at the Amphur, the district office, and then a celebration at Knock's house with her family from Udon Thani, a few of her friends, Declan, and a couple of Irish lads I'd gotten to know through him. There are photographs. I look slightly stunned in most of them, and also, and this is harder to say, genuinely pleased. Not performing happiness, actually having some. I moved my things from the apartment into Knock's house, canceled the lease. The monthly support for her parents started in November, 25,000 baht a month, about 680 euros, for food, transport, her mother's medication, the occasional hospital visit. I transferred it myself on the first of each month, directly to her father's account, and Knock sent me the receipts. I have a folder of those receipts on my laptop, 11 months of them. They're all real, and it was fine, actually fine. I was living in a house with a woman who was decent to me and a child who had started somewhere around month 10 to call me Brendan rather than just looking at me with frank assessment. We had dinners. We watched Thai television I half understood. On Sunday mornings, there was a market near the old city walls, and we went sometimes, the three of us, Mei Li insisting on buying the same coconut pancakes from the same stall every week as a matter of principle. Month 14, that's when the house proposal came up. It wasn't sudden. It came the way most things came with knock. Mentioned first almost sideways, then revisited, then discussed with more detail as I didn't object. Her parents were finding the stairs difficult, her mother especially. The family had land in Udon Thani, a plot sitting unused, and a single-story house would solve the problem properly rather than patching around it. Modest, she said. Practical. Her cousin knew a contractor. The estimate came in at 1.4 million baht, about 38,000 euros. I went very still when she told me. Not angry, not even alarmed exactly. More the way you go still when you're underground and something doesn't sound right. A vibration, a change in the air. You don't panic, you stop, and you listen, and you think. I'd never done the full accounting in my head until that moment. I went away that evening and sat with a piece of paper and wrote it all down. The machine loan, 85,000 baht. Never repaid, but let's park that. The monthly support, 11 months at 25,000 baht, which was 275,000 baht. The shared living costs and the trips and the general running of a life, another 550,000 baht roughly. Plus whatever I'd spent in those first few months before the marriage. Against the sin sod of 300,000 baht, which was gone regardless. And now 1.4 million baht more. I sat there looking at the number for a while. In euros, it came to somewhere north of 85,000 euros total if I said yes to the house. From a starting position of 270,000 euros, with 22,000 euros sitting locked in a Thai bank account for the visa, and nothing coming in. The house request wasn't outrageous. I knew men whose Thai wives had asked for far more, and whose families' needs were entirely genuine. I wasn't certain Nock was calculating anything. I still don't know. What I knew, sitting with that piece of paper, was that I hadn't been paying attention to the trajectory, only to each individual step, and that I needed to find out, before I said yes or no to anything, what I was actually dealing with. I needed to know if she'd stay if the money stopped. And I knew, sitting there, that I'd already been working out how to find out. I want to be clear about something before I describe what I did. I'm not proud of the deception exactly, but I'm not ashamed of it either. I didn't go through her phone. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't set up a fake line account or ask Declan to test her or do any of the things I'd read about men doing, some of which struck me as humiliating and some of which struck me as cruel. What I did was change one fact and watch what happened. That felt like a thing I could live with. I thought about how to construct it for about a week. The land sale was the right mechanism. It was the source of everything, and a complication there would be plausible to anyone who knew Irish property law, which Nock did not. Stamp duty disputes are real. Solicitors' holds pending investigation are real. I wasn't claiming to be ruined. I was claiming uncertainty, a gray area, the kind of situation where a sensible person might say, let's pause on major expenditures until this resolves. I told her on a Tuesday evening. We were sitting in the kitchen after dinner. Mali in bed, a fan going in the corner because the heat had been heavy all day. I waited for a natural pause in the conversation and then said I needed to tell her about something. I said there was a problem with the land sale back home. The revenue had raised a query about the stamp duty calculation. My solicitor had advised me not to move significant funds until it was resolved. I said I didn't know how long it would take. Weeks, possibly months. I said I might be looking at losing a portion of it if the ruling went the wrong way. I watched her face while I said this. She was good. I'll give her that without bitterness, because it's simply true. Her expression moved through something that looked like concern, then settled into something that looked like composure, and she reached across the table and held my hand and said, "It's okay. We'll manage. It doesn't change anything." They were the right words, perfectly the right words. And the thing is, I couldn't tell in that moment whether she meant them. That's the honest answer. I couldn't tell. She might have. I've spent a lot of time since then wondering if she meant them when she said them and only started calculating later. I don't know. I'll never know. The shift came gradually, not the next day, not that week. But over the following 3 weeks, small things changed in ways that were individually explainable and collectively unmistakable. Her line replies were a few hours slower than before. Not always, but often enough that I noticed. And I'm not a man who monitors that sort of thing. Evenings at home, she was present but somewhere slightly farther away. Not cold, not unkind. Just the draft quality. A door open a crack that had previously been closed. Her Uncle Sumchai rang twice in the space of 10 days. Both times she took the call in the other room. Both times she came back with a face that I recognized from the bog. It's the face a man makes when he's been told something he already knew and is now working out what to do about it. A neutral face that is doing a lot of work underneath. I think about those phone calls. What was said? Whether the house plan was discussed. Whether Somchai asked directly about the tax situation and Nok told him. I don't know. I never asked. The not asking was deliberate. I wanted to see what happened naturally, not what happened when she knew she was being watched. 6 weeks after I'd told her about the frozen accounts, she sat me down. It was a Sunday afternoon. Malay was at a friend's house. Nok made tea, which she always did when she was preparing to say something considered, and she sat across from me and was quiet for a moment and then said, carefully, gently, in the measured way of someone who had rehearsed this, that she'd been thinking, that perhaps they had moved too quickly, that perhaps it would be better, given everything I was dealing with financially, if I were to return to Ireland for a while to sort out my affairs, and that then, once things were clearer, we could reconsider everything with clearer heads. Reconsider everything with clearer heads. I've turned that phrase over many times. It's a good phrase. It's not a rejection. It's not an accusation. It contains a future, a conditional future, dependent on circumstances that we both knew weren't going to change in the way she was imagining. It was, I think, the most dignified exit she could offer me. And I'll say this much. She was decent about it. She didn't manufacture a fight. She didn't make me into a problem. She just opened a door and indicated, with quiet courtesy, that I should probably use it. I nodded. I said I understood. There was a pause that lasted longer than most pauses, and in that pause I nearly told her. I nearly said, the money's fine. The accounts aren't frozen. I wanted to know what you do. I didn't, because it wouldn't have helped anything, and because whatever she said in response would have been managed, and because I already knew what I needed to know. I booked a flight that evening. 3 days. On the last morning I packed my bag. I had less than when I'd arrived, which I found faintly amusing. Nok was at the shop. We'd said our goodbyes the night before, properly without drama. I had a car booked for 11. Malay was home, school holiday of some kind. She was at the kitchen table drawing when I came downstairs with my bag, and she looked up and looked at the bag and looked at me and did the arithmetic that a 7-year-old does, which is faster and cleaner than the arithmetic adults do. I crouched down and said I was going back to Ireland for a while. She said, will you come back? I said I didn't know yet. She thought about this for a moment and then went back to her drawing. I stood there for a bit longer than I needed to. She'd been drawing a cat, which she always drew, and this one had an improbably large tail and very serious eyes. I didn't cry in the house. I managed that much. The grab car came, and I put my bag in, and we pulled out of the lane, and somewhere between the turn onto the main road and the overpass above the moat, I stopped managing it. It wasn't about Nok. I want to be accurate. It was about that drawing. The serious eyes, the improbable tail, all the ones still stuck to her bedroom wall that I wasn't going to see again. I've been back in Tullamore for about 6 months now. The heating makes its noise. The neighbors' sheep are fine. Let me give you the numbers because I think you're owed them cleanly. Sin Sod, 300,000 baht, which is 8,200 euros. Machine loan, 85,000 baht, 2,300 euros, never repaid. Monthly parent support across 11 months, 275,000 baht, approximately 7,500 euros. Shared living costs, trips, The general running of a life together over 14 months, 550,000 baht, roughly 15,000 euros. And the architect's initial drawings for the Udon Thani house, which I'd agreed to commission while I was still deciding whether to say yes to the full project. 180,000 baht, 4,900 euros. That's already gone. You can't unorder drawings. Add it up. Depending on whether you count the sin sod as a loss, and you should, because there's no recovery mechanism for that, you arrive at somewhere between 38,000 euros and 52,000 euros. Gone. Not coming back. I have 220,000 euros remaining, give or take. The 800,000 baht in the Thai bank account for the retirement visa has been released back since I'm no longer resident. So I've got that back too, which brings me to somewhere around 242,000 euros all in. Less than I arrived with. More than most men who've told their stories on this channel ended up with. I know that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. There are men who lost everything. House, pension, savings, dignity, sometimes their health, to situations that started exactly like mine and went further because nobody ran any test at all. I got out at 52,000 euros. In the vocabulary of this channel, that's a close call. The fact that 52,000 euros feels like a close call should perhaps tell you something about what the far calls look like. Now, what do I actually think happened? I don't know. That's my honest answer. And I've resisted replacing it with a cleaner one, because cleaner answers would be dishonest. I think Nok was a woman who had real obligations and limited resources, and who encountered a quiet Irish man with money and allowed herself to feel something genuine while also constructing a situation that would continue to serve those obligations. I think both things were true simultaneously. I think the warmth was real in the sense that it wasn't purely performed, but I also think its durability was contingent on a number I stopped providing, and she knew that, and on some level I knew it too, which is why I ran the test. Her mother's illness was real. The receipts were real. The family land in Udon Thani is real, and the need for a single-story house for aging parents with mobility problems is a real and very common situation in rural Isan. None of that was invented. What I can't tell you is how much of what she felt for me was genuine, and how much was a function of what I represented. And I suspect the truthful answer is that even she couldn't have told you, because that's not a distinction people sit down and work out clearly in themselves. What I know is that when the number changed, she was gone within 6 weeks, gently, dignified, but gone. The lesson I'd offer, and I'm wary of lessons because they make things sound tidier than they are, is this. Don't test what you're not prepared to know the answer to. I ran my test 14 months in, after the sin sod, after the machine money, after 11 months of wire transfers. I already knew something was wrong. That's what the arithmetic was. I'd been doing the arithmetic every time I didn't do it, if that makes sense. Every time I chose not to sit down and add up the numbers, I was choosing not to know. And eventually I needed to know, and I found out. Run the test earlier, not cruelly, not at the start, before anything has had a chance to be real, but before the sin sod, before you've signed your name to things you can't unsign, before you've stood in someone's kitchen long enough to have a cup on a particular shelf, and understand, genuinely understand, not just as a warning you've heard, that financial support and genuine affection are not mutually exclusive, but they are also not the same thing. And knowing which one you're being offered requires a clarity that loneliness makes very difficult to maintain. I wasn't exactly a catch, to be honest about it. 51 years old, not much to say for myself, showing up in someone else's city with money and no particular plan. I wanted warmth. I found warmth, real enough to feel. I paid for it. Whether that's a tragedy or just a transaction depends on the day you ask me. Malay will be 8 now. She's probably drawing cats with improbably large tails. I think about that occasionally and I don't know what to do with it, so I don't do anything. Maybe I'll go back to Chiang Mai, not to find someone, just to see if I like the city on its own terms, separate from everything I attach to it. Maybe I'll have cow soy at that place around the corner from the shop and just sit there and see how it feels. Declan's still there. He's still settled in the way that settled men are. I haven't decided. I'm still doing the arithmetic. That was Brendan's story. 51 years old, a man from the awfully bogs who came to Thailand looking for something he couldn't quite name and found something real enough to hurt when it ended. We want to say something clearly before we sign off, because this story sits in a complicated place. 52,000 euro is what we're calling a close call on this channel. Think about that number. Think about what it represents in years of work, in choices made and unmade. And then think about the fact that the men who lose everything, the men who lose 200,000, who lose their homes back in England or Australia or Texas, who find themselves at 60 with nothing, those men often started exactly where Brendan started, at a cooking class, at a coffee shop, in a situation that didn't look like the horror stories they'd read. Sin sod is real. Family obligation in Thailand is real. The pressure on eldest daughters from rural Isan to support aging parents is real and profound, and not invented for foreigners. We are not here to tell you that Thai culture is a trap. It isn't. What we are here to tell you is that genuine cultural practice and financial exploitation can coexist in the same situation, sometimes in the same person, and that the combination is more dangerous than either would be alone, precisely because you can't dismiss it as simple dishonesty. Brendan's test worked because it was designed for someone who was honest with himself about what he feared. Most men don't run the test because they already know what the result will be, and they don't want to lose what they have, even if what they have is conditional. That's human. That's completely human. But it's also how 52,000 euros becomes 200,000 euros, becomes everything. Thailand isn't a warning. It's a place. A complicated, beautiful, occasionally ruthless place where people have real lives and real needs, and where a man arriving with money and loneliness is, whatever his intentions, operating in a context he probably doesn't fully understand. Understand it better before you arrive. That's all we're asking. This is Thailand. We'll see you next time.